Other people's experience is quite enlightening, or can be, both from, what works and what doesn't work. Look around perhaps at people who you think, oh man, you know what? They're just not getting it. They had this opportunity and they failed because of X, Y, Z. What's that all about? As well as the people who have succeeded despite the fact that they faced huge obstacles. There are a lot of lessons learned from other people's experiences, so I don't want to belittle that. But at the same time, you can't lock yourself into, oh, well, so-and-so did it this way, and I can't do it, therefore I'm doomed. Find another path then. Find somebody else who speaks to you or some other way of dealing with it. Sometimes you have to destroy a little bit in order to create.
Welcome to I Share Hope, the podcast where world leaders share their real stories of hope and how you can use actionable hope to start changing your life today. And now, here's your host, Chris Williams.
Hello, sir. How are you?
All right. How are you?
Good. Is video going to work on your side today?
I'm going to give it a whirl.
I'm going to give it a whirl on my side too and see how we come out. All right, I can see me. I can see you too. Great. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. So again, I'm Chris Williams. You go by Steve or Steven?
Either's fine.
Okay. And then Callahan, is that the right way to say your last name?
Yeah, I guess so. That seems pretty straightforward.
Man, I've read about you before in the past. It's a pretty amazing gig. Not one I'm sure you'd choose, but wow, you got a great story.
Oh, thanks. Well, it was a long time ago when I was a young guy like you, and
I don't know, man. I'm not as young as I used to be.
Well, a little further along than you are.
So what do you do? Oh, I'll ask you this in the interview. I don't want to get too far ahead because everything you say is just interesting to everybody. So.
No, I don't know that, but okay. So this interview do you edit this? Is it taped live? How do you do this?
Yeah, so we try to not edit if we don't have to, because kind of the whole podcasting thing, everybody that's in the podcasting world that does interviews really loves the authenticity of an interview, and they don't want the whole CNN take and the spin. So we ask the questions. It's your story, it's your time, and if you listen to any big interview podcast, they're all pretty rough, and we try to keep ours kind of timely and not hour and a half, 2 hours long like some of these guys get, but just to make it where it's relevant and real people connecting to real people's stories, and something you can use,
Okay.
So pretty straightforward. I sent you in the sign-up process, you probably got that interview 101 document that kind of had the 5 questions we walk people through.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I'm not sure how well I'll be able to answer them. It was strange when you contacted me about the show and talking about hope. Perhaps ironically, it's not something I actually think that much about or ever have, really.
That's it's interesting. Some of the people we interview, a lot of the people we interview actually say that. They man, hope's not something I really work on. And they are the best people at it. I don't know how it works. Well,
I did have to look up some stuff. I kind of looked around, Googled some quotes and whatnot.
Perfect.
And some of them kind of spoke to me more than others, I have to say. So I jotted some down and jotted down a couple ideas of my own that I could probably read better than kind of describing.
That's fine.
If that's okay with you.
Totally okay. Yeah.
And I don't know if you wanted me just to send you these things, I can just email them to you or something.
I'm good either way. You can email me your answers if you want to, or read them. Most people that do that, they read them actually out loud. If you have an answer for a question, they just read it, because again, most people are learning and hearing about this stuff via audio. So your words, man, that's what counts. Let me just get my mic set up right here. I think I'm getting can you hear a lot of background noise?
I hear there's kind of a whoosh that's going on in the background. I don't know if that's traffic or a stream nearby or what.
Yeah, it's traffic.
Yeah.
I love being outside, and sometimes that gets me into trouble from an audio standpoint, but I'm pretty determined to keep doing it. So
You're disappearing now, though.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Either the volume's way down or something happened.
Yeah, I cut it back a little bit. Let me turn it back up just a little bit more.
Yeah, that's
getting a little better. How about that? Okay.
Yep.
All right,
or you
good.
can go down a little bit if you want to cut out.
Okay. Yeah, just that too.
It should be quiet here. I live in the sticks of Maine, and so, I mean, my wife's kind of rattling around upstairs, but it's usually pretty quiet.
What part of Maine do you live in?
Near Mount Desert Island, Acadia National Park.
Absolutely.
You know?
I know it, not as well as you do, but I know it well enough. Been up there a couple of times, and my wife and I went from, let's see, we were in, is it Bar Harbor, Maine? Kind of up that way, yep. We rode our bikes from Bar Harbor to Acadia. That was a long ride.
Yeah, that's it.
And she was pregnant, and she didn't do so well on the way back, so we hitchhiked our way back. It's probably 10 years ago.
You hitchhiked way back, Mount Desert to where?
Down towards Bar Harbor. I mean, we were a long way out. We spent a lot of time, and
you were like on a hike or something.
We were on a bike ride, yeah, and we found somebody with a trailer on a Jeep, and they gave us a ride.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to mute some of this background noise when we get started.
All right. Well, now I don't hear you at all.
I'll hit the mute when we talk, and that way, when I'm not talking, they'll be able to hear you a little better off. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. Well, Steve Callahan, if I get this correct, you have been afloat at sea for, 76 days, and written a book that's a New York Times bestseller, Adrift, is that right?
That's all correct,
And you're still here to tell the tale. So I got fascinated with seagoing lifeboat stories when I first read The Life of Pi, which is, I know, a mockery of the real thing. But nonetheless, that's what got me started. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am to talk to you today, a real life guy who's spent a lot of time far, far away from everybody and everything that there is to eat that you'd probably consider yummy. So, man, tell us what you're doing. What are you doing today apart from your speaking and all that stuff? You're in Maine. What do you do up there?
Right. I live in Maine with my wife Kathy, and we've been based here for about 40 years. We feel at home a lot of places around the world. We've both traveled a fair amount, mostly through my work. And we like to say we have homes everywhere, but Maine's our home of homes. As we like to say up here, where men are men and so are the women. It's kind of a rugged place. People, kind of do their own thing, are very independent and pretty hardy. We're used to going through big ups and downs in the state a lot, economically and so on. So people up here are pretty resilient. And I always love the wilderness environments, and Maine has got a lot of wilderness still. It's a beautiful place to live physically. So it's good for us. And I've done a lot of different things. I'm a lot older now. You have to remember that when I was stupid enough to lose my boat in the middle of the Atlantic and spent the next 2.5 months bobbing around like an aquatic caveman, I was just 30 years old, just turned 30 years old in the liferaft, actually. Not the best of my birthdays. And I'm 63 now, so I've done quite a lot since then. I've designed and built boats and written both Adrift and Capsize, and contributed to a lot of other books, written a lot of magazine articles and so on. I've been playing around with boats in the ocean for a long time, and also with a lot of survivors. When I got ashore, it seemed like a lot of people thought that I was some kind of survival expert, which I wasn't really. But I've learned a lot in the years since. And one of the things I learned was that a lot more people were interested in this little tale of mine than I ever expected they would be, because I think, in part, you get into survival, it's the universal human issue. We all go through it one way or the other pretty much every day. So people can relate to the story even if they've never been to sea before or don't know anything about the ocean, because of the universal human qualities and what we all experience as we struggle through life.
You're right. I think that's a fascinating way to take it, because survival really comes down to surviving. And I kind of think survival goes farther than that. It goes back into thriving too, because kind of if you're just surviving and just barely hanging on, you wouldn't want to spend your life in the lifeboat. 76 days. Yeah, 76 days was quite enough. And you got back to life again, and that's a big part of it,
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll touch on a number of these issues. You're absolutely right. In fact, I often talk about not only surviving but thriving, literally using that term, and have been working on a book pretty much forever about that topic, about not only surviving life's greatest challenges but learning how to thrive through them. And I think that I can speak for certainly a lot of survivors in that. We don't choose to be in these kind of circumstances, certainly, but we do have the opportunity to gain a huge amount from them. And, I've had other survival experiences in the years since. I don't think anybody gets to be my age unless they're extremely lucky without going through some kind of real survival experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical, but certainly some kind of emotional or other kind of experience. Can be crises in business or all kinds of different things that have commonalities with me bobbing around in the middle of the ocean. But through these struggles, we do find huge opportunities. And it's interesting that you mentioned Life of Pi, because that was an opportunity for me. Because in 2009, Ang Lee, the director of that film, got in touch with me because I mentioned in the book. And I guess since Captain Bligh and some of the other characters who were mentioned in the book are no longer available for comment, they chased down the only guy left standing.
Wow, that's great.
So we spent some days with him, and I ended up being the survival and marine consultant on that film. And one thing we tried to do to it, even though it's such a kind of wacky allegorical fantasy, is to bring my experience 30-some years forward and to use a lot of the basis of it for what was filmed. As Ang said, to lend it authenticity and make it convincing. And that would have only been possible by using kind of integrating real-life survival experiences, how you feel, how you the things you go through, and what the nature of the ocean is actually like. It's amazing diversity and grandeur, as well as its ability to inflict a lot of horror and pain onto the big screen. So I really appreciated having that opportunity, and I've also worked on another film since then that does sort of the same thing. So those things would have only been possible had I been drifting in the Atlantic 30 years before.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Well, all the movie opportunities for somebody who wants to go floating in the Atlantic, I should recommend that to people. People trying to get in the movies all the time, they just need to go get in a lifeboat, right?
Yeah, don't line up for it though. It's not a good time, frankly. It's not like we look for this stuff or want to have these experiences. But we can't be afraid of life and doing things in life, because inevitably we'll run into challenges, and that's a big part of life. It's actually the thing that really does give us these huge opportunities for new understanding and growth.
Man, great point. Well, let's hear the questions and the answers. So question one, and anybody who's new joining us, we're asking 1,000 people who are leaders in the realm of hope around the world these same 5 questions. And the answers are diverse and fascinating. So question one, what's your favorite quote about hope, or statement of hope, your belief about hope, whatever you want to put in there?
Well, I had to look these up. I had to look up some quotes. I really am not an expert about hope. And in fact, I really don't think about it as a subject very much. We all use it in everyday language all the time. Oh, I hope that it's not going to rain tonight or whatever, but it usually doesn't mean a whole lot. But of course, when you're really in a crisis, it takes on a whole new meaning. So I did look up some quotes to see what I might most relate to. And if you don't mind, I might read a couple of them anyway.
That's great. I'll take all you got, man.
Okay, well, the first one is from Aristotle Onassis, of all people, who married, of course, Jackie Onassis, the late President Kennedy's wife.
So not the Aristotle that we read about in 9th grade, but the other one. Yeah, the current
No,
one.
no, not the ancient philosopher Aristotle, but the modern ship magnate, who I'm sure is no longer with us as well. But he said, "We must free ourselves of the hope that the sea will ever rest. We must learn to sail in high winds." And I think that that's very apropos. And another I liked was hope lies in dreams, in imagination, and in the courage of those who dare to make dreams into reality. That's from Jonas Salk. Another is, it is often in the darkest skies that we see the brightest stars, by Richard Evans. And finally, from William Faulkner, an American great, you cannot swim for new horizons until you have courage to lose sight of the shore.
Ooh, wow.
I like all of those.
Man, those are good. I do too. I think question 3 maybe made more sense than question 2, so we'll get to question 2 in a minute, but I'd love to jump in and see, just tell me your story. How did this happen? What went on?
Okay, basically I had made a life for myself afloat. My life was in kind of disarray. I was separated from my wife, and so I set off on Pee Wee Herman's great oceanic adventure and left the United States with everything that I had. I'd always wanted to sail across the ocean with in a small boat, simple boat, and to see what's really possible to do with very little, sort of oceanic version of backpacking, if you will. And so I had a really great time going over to England, and then things got a little rough. I had started a race there, dropped out, ended up cruising down Spain and Portugal out to the Canary Islands, and left the Canary Islands in February of 1982. And you're somewhat far south there, so it's not like being in the winter in the North Atlantic. It's the southern part of the North Atlantic, and the trade winds, and I thought I'd have a pretty easy time in the milk run, but that was not to be. About a week out, something hit the side of the boat at night, and it was in a bit of a blow.
So we're talking North Atlantic, like, tell me again what we're nearby land-wise
like
for...
Anything north of the equator, but it's the southern part of that. The Canary Islands are just off of that, basically, and that surprisingly is, even the Sahara Desert's a lot farther north than you imagine it is, because it's warmer on that side because of the nature of currents and whatnot. Okay. And so I was going west, a little south of west, to go to the Caribbean, where it would be nice and balmy and all that kind of stuff. And I got out not to quite where it was balmy yet. Water was still cold, and the weather was brewing up, and something hit the side of the boat, and it filled up with water, and I bailed out. And in inflated life raft, about 6 feet in diameter, not quite big enough on the inside so I could stretch out, and had a little tent on the top, and I went drifting across the Atlantic for the next 1,800 miles in 2.5 months.
Incredible.
Yeah, and so basically, that kind of an experience, we have all kinds of survival experiences, long, short term. This is sort of a longer term experience, and people tend to go through a number of different stages. So the psychology and what happens to people, it gets to be pretty complex. It's hard to cover it all, but I'll give you a few examples of things that kind of kept me going. In the initial stage, of course, you're escaping the immediate threat. And fortunately for me, I had been out on my own in kind of isolated environments, dealing with problems with limited resources throughout most of my life, both backpacking in the mountains and being offshore in a boat where you can't just park it on the side of the road and hope that somebody's going to come and get you out of the fix you've gotten into. So that was good training for that immediate stage, because a lot of people can become frozen. About 15% of people become frozen in panic, or just don't know what to do, or they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and actually becoming a problem can endanger people around them. And about 2/3 of people can be pretty functional but need direction. They just don't know what to do. They're out of their wheelhouse and really are just a bit lost until somebody can direction them. And about 15% of people are able to do this kind of psychological splitting, where they have enough training and whatnot, to be able to go through the steps of just going through the motions. I got to get up, I got to do this, I got to do that. So in my head, in those initial stages, there was a lot of conflict because people aren't single dimensional. I found they're multidimensional animals, and we think a lot of things, feel a lot of things, all at the same time. When you ask somebody, well, what do you think about that? If you're a thoughtful person and really figure it out, you'll probably think a lot of things about it, sometimes conflicting things.
Yeah.
So I was going through all of that. There was part of me that was freaking out, that was telling me I was going to die and whatnot, but I was able to get through that stage. And then the second stage sets in, which is very difficult to get through. And that's one of disorientation and fear, I call it. Some people call it recoil. There's not a lot more you can do. But your whole old life has gone away, and it's like, what now? And for me, it was like, how can I even survive out here? The ocean's beautiful, but it's completely clear of fish. I can't figure out any way of making fresh water, even though I had devices that were supposed to work for that and whatnot. And it took me about 2 weeks to get through that stage, and it's really horrible. It's when all those bad things in your life kind of come back to you. All your failures haunt you. You feel like you're the most idiotic person ever to have existed. You just really beat yourself up, and it's hard to get through that, and especially for that period, and I think for a lot of other episodes throughout the 2.5 months, I really did rely on what Winston Churchill once said, which is, when going through hell, keep going. You just keep on doing it. If you have a failure, you just kind of keep on working at it, and eventually maybe you'll figure it out. I mean, you have to also balance that with knowing when to cut your losses and try something else and stuff like that, which is hard to do when you're by yourself. But there are a lot of these techniques. On the longer term, there are things like normalizing life as much as possible that kept me going.
Really? So even in a situation like you're in, I mean, so let's say trauma happens here, stateside, and it's, a family trauma, and you try to normalize that by talking to friends, by having a regular routine, by getting out and going to the coffee shop or going to a movie. But I mean, you're freaking all alone in the middle of the ocean. There's really not much normal about that you can lean back and say, oh yeah, we're just going to call this a normal day.
Well, I was still afloat. And
okay.
Tried to convince myself of was that it was not the end of the voyage. It was a continuation in a little bit more humble craft. So I got up in the morning, I navigated, I did exercise. Once the ecosystem started developing around the raft on which I would depend for all my food, they were, early in the morning and at dusk were the most productive times for me to fish. I rationed things, I navigated, I kept a log, I tried to find humor where I could find it. It's a really bad sign in survival situations when people have a complete sense of humor failure, especially somebody who normally is humorous and all of a sudden they go dead quiet. Is not a good sign.
Wow.
And find humor everywhere. There's sort of a gallows humor that you develop in these situations where you even recognize the humorously absurd in the situation that might be killing you at the same time. So all those things were very helpful in getting through it. And then, adaptation also requires acceptance. Acceptance of reality. The quicker you can accept what is actually happening and the truth of your situation, the quicker you can get on to dealing with it. Denial is absolutely the worst enemy you can have in a survival situation. So
a question right there then, how do you go from, I have to normalize this experience, I'm stuck in the middle of the ocean by myself with the sharks, so we're normalizing that, and yet we're not denying the situation. Obviously, yeah, I'm stuck in the middle of the ocean with only my shark friends, but denying that in my mind would kind of be like normalizing, like, oh, it's not as bad as it looks, or hey, it's okay, it's just another day in the ocean, or I mean, there's a fine line there, I assume, where which way are you going to go with that,
Yeah. I can understand what you're saying, but for me anyway, and I found for other survivors, no, it's real brass tacks time. You can't you can't lie to yourself. You can't put things off. You can't, wish for things. And I've thought a lot about this in your basic questions about hope. Hope is not wishing for things. It's not sitting around wishing that somebody would come and save you from the predicament that you've almost always gotten yourself into, or at least found yourself in. And it's not wishing for things to, quote, return to normal. Oh, I just can't wait for things to turn to normal. We often say that in our lives. It's like, what's normal? Normal is what exists. And normal is what you forge out of what exists now. Otherwise, normal will be, you're the victim of the new normal that everybody else in reality is creating. So you have to kind of take that responsibility from square one and say, well, what is it that I actually need versus what I want? That's one bit of truth that you need to separate. And then, okay, how do I achieve what I actually need on a minimum basis? And go at it. And if you can't find a solution, then you come up with another one. One thing that survivors are famous for are, I say that if necessity is the mother of invention, and survival is its matriarch, because they're just, all survival stories are full of all these real bits of invention, where you take things out of their normal context and you use them in a completely different way. People in the film Apollo 13 by Ron Howard has a beautiful part of it where they're being poisoned by CO2, and people are always the designers are always backfilling and going, oh, well, wait a minute, that wasn't designed to do this, and that wasn't designed to do that, and kind of covering their butts about it. And finally, the head of the operation says, look, I don't care what it was designed to do. I want to know what it can do. And they design this whole thing, rigmarole, pulling out bits of duct tape and whatever they can find on the craft.
Yeah.
The problem. Sailors do this all the time. At sea, Murphy is an optimist, because not only will everything that can go wrong, but even the things that can't go wrong will figure out a way of going wrong. So you got to be prepared for that and deal with that on a kind of constant basis. And, I've talked to survivors who've signaled planes with credit cards because they're no longer useful as a credit card, but they're a shiny, waterproof surface. And so you start looking at things a slightly different way. You look for key qualities, and it can even be in people's personalities. It's very important for groups of people who interact to figure out, what are people really good at? If you're with a team of people, or if I've gone through, especially the last few years, a very serious illness, and it was a very different kind of situation from Adrift, because there I was completely dependent on everybody around me. And, some people were really good at some things, and some people are really good at other things. And you learn about these things and try to exploit that, if you will, because everything is a balance. I look at life and everything in life, even when I was in the liferaft, is having a kind of yin-yang balance to it. There's huge beauty in the middle of a storm, and there's also great power. There's danger there, but there's also an exhilaration and a being in touch with yourself that you can't get in any other way. The whole life raft experience was like that. I saw so many things that were potent to me, visually beautiful, incredibly rewarding, inspiring, uplifting, spiritual. And I could not have had those experiences had I not been in this horrible situation to begin with. So I try to look at that in life. And when you're in a situation, you can say, oh, okay, well, this really sucks from this and that point of view, but what can I get out of it? Or, how can I minimize that kind of damage or threat and maximize other qualities that come with that? So when I was in the raft, it was things like, okay, it's blowing hard. And that made it really difficult for me to fish, and it made it difficult for me to produce water. But then I would become elated because I'm being pushed to my destination at a quicker rate. And when it was hot and completely flat out, it was really grueling. And but I could at least fish, and I could produce a lot more water doing that way. So you accept that. It doesn't mean that you're happy about it, about whatever that balance is, but you at least come to accept it and move forward.
Well, you got so many great just nuggets of wisdom in there for so many circumstances in life, not just the few of you who get to float around in the ocean by yourselves, but there's most people have some sort of trauma or something to survive in life. Life's just not kind enough to leave everybody alone, or most people alone. There's always a hard day, and man, you just got so many little nuggets of wisdom in there. So back to question 2 then, kind of going out of order here. Who's shared hope with you in the past? Who's been somebody who's just kind of pumped it into you and said, hey, don't quit, don't give up? Maybe in your current or recent illness versus life raft, I don't know, any other situation in life?
Well, Jesus, lots of people. It's hard for me to single things out because, of course, life is this mishmash and so many influences, and parts of it come from one person or another. In the raft, in Adrift, I bring up a couple of people. One was the guy who taught me how to sail, who really taught me a lot about personal responsibility and in dealing with things. He always allowed me to make decisions with him, and he was really the perfect mentor who would let me get into just enough trouble to learn something from it, but never to put anybody in danger, and allowed me to take responsibility for making decisions, navigating, doing everything on the boat and so on myself. And so that was really a positive in terms of learning to deal with life yourself. Don't, not having somebody come along and always pick up my own trash, but making me do it myself. That was a good thing. I mean, my parents did that. There was an old lobsterman friend of ours up here, George Bracey, and he went through incredible things during his lifetime, did a lot of stuff, and he'd tell you these stories, and you'd just tell him, you're full of it, that never happened. Then he'd drag out some newspaper story that said, well, George Bracey roller skated down Cadillac Mountain. Okay. And so that was a, those kind of people are a great inspiration too, because they show you that the long shot, the miracle does happen, and people make it happen. And I had read a lot of survival stories before I got myself into this situation too, other ocean survival stories and whatnot. I loved that stuff as a kid, whether it was Robinson Crusoe, which is actually based on a real historical character, to 119 Days Adrift by Maurice and Marilyn Bailey, who were in a life raft in the Pacific and created a world of their own out there. Even though it looks hopeless when you're in it, and I think it's inevitable that people feel very alone when they face a crisis, even if they know intellectually, like, a million other people have had cancer, but I have cancer, and nobody really gets where I'm coming from, especially in my circle of people I'm dealing with all the time and whatnot. And there's a certain truth to that you can be isolated, but what also joins us all is that as I said at the beginning, survival is the universal theme in human existence, and we all go through it. So we have something to learn from all those people who've gone before us, and just knowing that they've gone through tough times. And for me, I was worldly enough. I traveled around the world and seen people living in very rudimentary existences, things that we would consider survival experiences here in the United States. And yet somehow they found a reason not only to get up in the morning and get through day, but actually found reasons to laugh and to play and to make music and, create life. So it's tough doing it when you're really in the trenches, but it helps to keep that perspective at least in the back of your mind.
That's good. Laughing and playing and making music and being intentional about those things, that's so hard to do. You're right, when times are tough, but boy, that encourages me to get out there and do a little more of that on a daily basis too.
Well, and for me, like I was sitting in the hospital bed and with not a very good prognosis, but I have to tell you, this was a thing that went on for a couple of years.
Can I ask what the illness was, or do you talk about it?
I had leukemia, acute
Leukemia.
myeloid.
Oh,
And had a complication that required a stem cell transplant in the clinical trial, and fortunately it worked for me.
wow.
But going through all of that, I can't think of a day that went by in the hospital where we didn't find reason to kind of joke around with the nurses and whatnot. And, there is life in crisis, or can be.
That's a good quote. There is life in crisis. Or there can be life in crisis, either way you want to look at it. And there probably is. You just got to find it. Question 4, what are you doing to share hope with other people today? What's your world all about? Hey, you're the person who's answering the questions, and you say, I really don't focus that much on hope, but man, I don't know what else you focus on then. You must just be a natural at it. So what are you doing out there today?
Thanks. Well, today I'm talking to you, basically.
I love that. Thanks.
And that's okay. And I'm given those kind of opportunities quite frequently through having written Adrift, and I go out and talk about it and all that kind of stuff. And I don't do it a lot, but every now and then, a couple times a year, I'll go someplace and interact with people and tell them this tired old tale, and they still seem to be interested. And I think, again, it's because it ties into everybody's life experience one way or the other. And so that's mostly how I do it. I also write articles. I've written a lot about safety and survival, and I've been involved with groups of people who deal with other kinds of survivors besides oceanic survivors, everything from, abusive environments to, I don't know, other like real hands-on ocean survival training, that kind of thing. So I do it through that, through writing, and through working on these films, hopefully. If people have seen The Life of Pi and they feel inspired by it, well, there's a part of that, at least a little bit of that comes through my prior experience. So through all that stuff. I'm
sure a large part of it. So this Robert Redford movie that's on Netflix saw recently, do you have anything to do with that one, or do you think it's accurate? I mean, it's a great movie. Got my attention.
Oh, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. But basically, no, I didn't have anything to do with it. And B, no, it's not accurate at all. I can tell you. Mariners are kind of cringing at that film because, technically everything in it is kind of wrong from square one to the end.
Oh, that's too bad, man. So you're saying The Life of Pi, the fictional tale, is more accurate than the Robert Redford movie? That's
kind of.
Isn't Hollywood great, man? Movies are so fun. You can do anything.
It is. I love it. But it's. I'm happy when something like that touches anybody, and it seems that film has reached a lot of people. So who am I to throw stones? Whatever.
All right. Question 5. Give me some simple ABC steps. How do I start sharing hope or pushing others towards this not just surviving but thriving mentality that you talk about a lot? So I'm going to walk away from this conversation and do what next?
Oh, Jesus. That's a really tough question, and I'm not sure as I can answer it.
I bet you can. You do it all day long.
Everybody has to find their own path, I think.
That's a good answer.
Take things one step at a time. One really important thing is don't overwhelm yourself with the huge goal, whatever it might be. For me, in recent years, it was like to survive leukemia, and it was like, okay, fine, I got to, that's the goal. But I'm not focused on that. In fact, I don't think about that a lot. What I'm thinking about is, what are all the baby steps that will add up to that? Somebody's coming in and they're going to go, I'm going to have to go through this particular procedure, and it ain't going to be pleasant. So how do I do that? Take it one step at a time. I'm always been the kind of guy who's doesn't focus too much on throwing myself off the end of this diving board that's way up there, and just think about, where do I put my next hand on the ladder, and then I'm up there, and then it was like, okay, now I go down there and I focus on that. Just be really focused. And I think actually it kind of brings up something that this guy, I'm going to have a chemo moment now, wrote about. He was a Zen master. Alan Watts, excuse me for that.
Alan Watts, okay.
Alan Watts wrote a great book called The Wisdom of Insecurity, and it's about, that acceptance of things not being secure, that we live in this insecure world and insecure moments, and everything's always in transition. And I can't remember if it was in that book or one of his other books, and he mentioned sport. He said, sport's the Zen of Western man. And it took me a long time in my life to kind of figure out, what is that all about? What does that mean? And the more I've talked to a number of other people about it in kind of the last couple of years, one of whom was a mountain climber who fell a long distance and landed on it, basically exploded his legs. He's lost a leg. And other people who do those sorts of things. I have lots of friends who go out and they do these things that we normally consider a little off the edge. And there is a commonality amongst these people where they feel a kind of spiritual enlightenment through the act. Because one thing that happens when you're doing something that's very difficult and risky and on the edge, which includes survival, is that you're very focused. And kind of the past doesn't really mean very much, and the future doesn't mean very much. It's all in the moment. And unless you do that kind of stuff, you really can't quite get it, I think. So I would encourage people to expand their comfort zones, take a little bit of risk. I think the riskiest thing in life is to try to avoid all risk, because then you get kind of, it'd be like somebody, trying to keep themselves from having a heart attack, so they just sit at home and eat a lot of food and lay around. And, that's really not a good prescription for that.
Right.
Unfortunately, life requires risk, and it requires us getting up and going around and doing things. And that entails running into problems and failures and all that stuff. And that's how we learn how to adapt and how to deal with new situations that aren't exactly the same, but they're stressful, and they present the same philosophical problems that my floating around in a life raft did. That the more we put ourselves out there in life, the better we get at it, I think.
That's another good quote. The more we put ourselves out there, the better we get at it. So I'm taking away from that to make your own path, in a sense. You can't do what somebody else did to heal, because it might not be the same way for you, or to survive, or to thrive. And you really have to take those very bold, deliberate steps throughout life, so that I don't grow stagnant, and that I continue to grow as a person, and that I continue to find that opportunity where I am so focused on the here and now that I'm actually living in this moment, not in the future or some great goal that I have for me long term that overwhelms me inevitably. But I get focused on these tasks right now, right here, and I succeed one day at a time.
You said it much better than I did.
Oh, no.
I do want to add this, though, that it's not about avoiding other people's experience either. That's why, it did me a great deal of good to have read about other people's survival experiences before I found myself in one. Other people's experience is quite enlightening, or can be, both from, what works and what doesn't work. Look around perhaps at people who you think, oh man, you know what, they're just not getting it. They had this opportunity and they failed because of XYZ. What's that all about? As well as the people who have succeeded despite the fact that they faced huge obstacles. There are a lot of lessons learned from other people's experiences, so I don't want to belittle that. But at the same time, you can't lock yourself into, oh, well, so-and-so did it this way, and I can't do it, therefore I'm doomed. Find another path then. Find somebody else who speaks to you, or some other way of dealing with it. And as I say, not everything's going to work. A lot of times you're going to fail. When I was in a life raft, I failed at a lot of different things. But Sometimes I could then back up from that and throw away that solution and find another one. And one of the ironies of facing at least the physical problems I did was that I learned that sometimes in order to fix something, you have to make it worse. I had holes in the floor, and I couldn't figure out any of these little pinholes, and all this water was squirting up, and it was a real pain in the neck. And so what I had to do is I had to open up those holes bigger until I had them big enough that I could put a plug in them. And, you see this in companies trying to reinvent themselves all the time, that, they look at their business and they go, well, maybe that's okay and whatnot, but basically it just does not work for our future. Right? So even though we're going to lose revenue by shutting this down, that's the better long-term solution. Sometimes you have to destroy a little bit in order to create.
Great point. Man, I love this. All right. Well, Steve Callahan, you have lots of places online and books and things that we can go and find out more about you. And what a wealth of knowledge and a resource you are for so many individuals and organizations who need to hear this message of don't just literally just don't survive through it, but you're thriving through things. Not just a rare occurrence of stranded on a lifeboat, but even cancer. I mean, you just keep doing it. So where can we find out more about you? Websites, social media, where do we go?
Yeah, I'm not a real big social media guy, I guess. I'm pretty old school. Although I try at times.
Although you got to admit that Twitter from a life raft
I have a website. It's stephencallahan.net.
Right.
And it's got a kind of a potpourri of junk on there. And otherwise, I have my books, Adrift and Capsized, another ocean survival tale. And you can go to the movies and watch Life of Pi, or upcoming film done by Ron Howard called In the Heart of the Sea, which is another ocean survival tale based in 1820, based on a true story, the real Moby Dick story.
Really?
Yeah, things like that. So I'm around. You can find me.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's great. I can't wait to see that new movie.
Yeah, me too.
When does it come out? Do you know?
I think it's out December 12th. It was supposed to come out in May, but they delayed it till Christmas time. So.
Oh,
great. As far as Chris Hemsworth, anybody who's a big Thor fan, they'll find Chris and all his
masculine glory. Yeah.
Out there doing his thing.
So I've seen trailers for that. The Big Moby Dick movie. Is that the Big Moby Dick movie that I keep seeing? Like trailers for? No way.
Yeah, it should be good. It should be good fun. It's probably not going to be history, but I think Ron's got a good message in it, and he makes good movies.
And
so.
Man, the graphics on that are incredible. So what do you do in that, like in that kind of a setting? What are you doing? You bring accuracy to the sea voyage process, to how the sailors work, to how the sea acts. I mean, how does that?
Well, in that case, not so much. In Life of Pi, I did a lot of different things. I made props. I kind of directed the wave tank. I had input on the script. I had lots of different influences in Life of Pi. In Ron's case, he basically wanted me to be there for the actors. Unlike Life of Pi, there are a number of actors in this crew, and so basically, I was there for them, trying to fulfill whatever needs they might have in terms of understanding what their roles might be like on board ship, and what would they be going through, what would their kind of character be going through the survival and that sort of thing. I did some other things there too, but that was my primary role with this.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
It was a lot of fun. And as maybe as a final note, I think one thing that's brought a lot of hope to me, as we get older, especially, our lives get bogged down with problems, and it's tougher as you get older to roll with the quickly changing world that we have, and you become very conscious of the huge problems facing our world and humanity. And I think one thing that's really picked up my spirits and given me hope, probably more than anything else, is when I interact with younger people. And I find that it's their world now, and they're very generally, I'm not saying that they're not like every other generation's come before, that there aren't people who are users as well as givers, and there aren't people who are greedy as well as generous and all that kind of stuff, and lazy as well as industrious. But I find great hope in the energy and spirit of young people, and what they want to do with their lives, and take the world forward and deal with these huge problems that unfortunately they're going to have to face, just as every generation faces the problems handed to them by prior generations. So
you're right. That's a good source of hope.
But I appreciate all that you do, and other people talking about these important issues. So.
Well, Steve, thanks for your time. You're the guy who's initiating all this and giving us a reason to get this conversation going. So, man, thank you very much for your time. I know it's valuable time, and you are a wealth of knowledge and a great source of hope, even though you don't think you talk about it all day. You sure do a heck of a job delivering.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Good luck. Thanks. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've just listened to I Share Hope. If you're ready to make a change, head to our website at isharehope.com and claim your free copy of the Top 10 Actions of Hope from World Leaders to use hope in your own life. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, I can see me. I can see you too.
All right.
Great. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, again, I'm Chris Williams. You go by Steve or Steven?
Either's fine.
Okay. And then Callahan, is that the right way to say your last name?
Yeah, I guess so. That seems pretty straightforward.
Man, I've read about you before in the past. It's a pretty amazing gig. Not one I'm sure you'd choose, but wow, you got a great story.
Oh, thanks. Well, it was a long time ago when I was a young guy like you, and
I don't know, man. I'm not as young as I used to be.
Well, I'm a little further along than you are.
So what do you do? Oh, I'll ask you this in the interview. I don't want to get too far ahead because everything you say is just interesting to everybody. So.
No, I don't know that, but okay. So this interview is. Do you edit this? Is it taped live? How do you do this?
Yeah. So we try to not edit if we don't have to, because kind of the whole podcasting thing. Everybody that's in the podcasting world that does interviews really loves the authenticity of an interview, and they don't want the whole CNN take and the spin. So we ask the questions. It's your story. It's your time. And, you know, if you listen to any big interview podcast, they're all pretty rough. And we try to keep ours kind of timely and not hour and a half, 2 hours long like some of these guys get. But just to make it where it's relevant and real people connecting to real people's stories, and something you can use, you know?
Okay.
So pretty straightforward. I sent you in the sign-up process, you probably got that interview 101 document that kind of had the 5 questions we walk people through.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I'm not sure how well I'll be able to answer them. It was strange when you contacted me about the show and talking about hope. Perhaps ironically, it's not something I actually think that much about or ever have, really.
That's it's interesting. Some of the people we interview, a lot of people we interview actually say that. They're like, man, hope's not something I really work on. And they are the best people at it. I don't know how it works. Well,
I did have to look up some stuff. You know, I kind of looked around. You know, Googled some quotes and whatnot.
Perfect.
And some of them kind of spoke to me more than others, I have to say. So I jotted some down and jotted down a couple ideas of my own that I could probably read better than kind of describing.
That's fine.
If that's okay with you.
Totally okay. Yeah.
And I don't know if you wanted me just to send you these things, I can just email them to you or something.
You know, I'm good either way. You can email me your answers if you want to, or read them. Most people that do that, they read them actually out loud. If you have an answer for a question, they just read it, because again, most people are learning and hearing about this stuff via audio. So your words, man, that's what counts. Let me just get my mic set up right here. I think I'm getting can you hear a lot of background noise?
I hear there's kind of a whoosh that's going on in the background. I don't know if that's traffic or a stream nearby or what.
Yeah, it's traffic.
Yeah.
I love being outside, and sometimes that gets me into trouble from an audio standpoint, but I'm pretty determined to keep doing it. So.
You're disappearing now, though.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Either the volume's way down or something happened.
Yeah, I cut it back a little bit. Let me turn it back up just a little bit more.
Yeah, that's
They get a little better. How about that? Okay.
Yep.
All right,
or you
good.
can go down a little bit if you want to cut out.
Okay. Adjust that too.
It should be quiet here. I live in the Styx of Maine, and so, I mean, my wife's kind of rattling around upstairs, but it's usually pretty quiet.
What part of Maine do you live in?
Near Mount Desert Island, Acadia National Park.
Absolutely.
You know?
I know it, not as well as you do, but I know it well enough. Been up there a couple of times, and my wife and I went from, let's see, we were in, is it Bar Harbor, Maine? Kind of up that way, yep. We rode our bikes from Bar Harbor to Acadia. That was a long ride.
Yeah, that's it.
And she was pregnant, and she didn't do so well on the way back, so we hitchhiked our way back. It's probably 10 years ago.
You hitchhiked way back, Mount Desert to where?
Down towards Bar Harbor. I mean, we were a long way out. We spent a lot of time, and
you were like on a hike or something.
We were on a bike ride, yeah, and we found somebody with a trailer on a Jeep, and they gave us a ride.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to mute some of this background noise when we get started.
All right. Well, now I don't hear you at all.
I'll hit the mute when we talk, and that way, when I'm not talking, they'll be able to hear you a little better off. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. Well, Steve Callaghan, if I get this correct, you have been afloat at sea for, 76 days, and written a book that's a New York Times bestseller, Adrift, is that right?
That's all correct,
And you're still here to tell the tale. So I got fascinated with
other people's experience is quite enlightening, or can be, both from, what works and what doesn't work. Look around perhaps at people who you think, oh man, you know what? They're just not getting it. They had this opportunity and they failed because of X, Y, Z. What's that all about? As well as the people who have succeeded despite the fact that they faced huge obstacles. There are a lot of lessons learned from other people's experiences, so I don't want to belittle that. But at the same time, you can't lock yourself into, oh, well, so-and-so did it this way, and I can't do it, therefore I'm doomed. Find another path then. Find somebody else who speaks to you or some other way of dealing with it. Sometimes you have to destroy a little bit in order to create.
Welcome to I Share Hope, the podcast where world leaders share their real stories of hope and how you can use actionable hope to start changing your life today. And now, here's your host, Chris Williams.
Hello, sir. How are you?
All right. How are you?
Good. Is video going to work on your side today?
I'm going to give it a whirl.
I'm going to give it a whirl on my side too and see how we come out.